All right. Yeah, welcome to this month's Portals Community Call. I'm Jason Gumpert from MS Dynamics World, and I'm really pleased to be able to help host these events every month. As usual, we are joined by Nicholas Hayduk, who will be taking things forward in just a minute for this month's session with a focus on server logic. Before that, though, I just want to mention we do welcome your questions. So please use the questions block at any time as we go, and Nick will be keeping an eye on that, as will I. We also are recording today's event, so if you miss any part of it, we will be sharing that with you after the session ends. So without any further delay, Nick, I'm going to hand things over to you.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. We got a fun topic where we're going to talking about one of the greatest features ever to come out for Power Pages, which is server logic. I've asked my colleague here at Engineered Code, Alan Rumberger, to join us today. He's used this new functionality on a couple of projects we got on the go right now. So I'm happy to have him, and he'll be kind of joining us later in the call to kind of just demonstrate a scenario that we've been working on, and that Microsoft has kind of provided some advice on as well for how to use server logic. So yeah, let's get into it because there's quite a bit of news, lots going on in the Power Pages space right now. So let's dive in. So if this is your first time joining us, welcome. My name is Nicholas Hayduk, President and Software Engineer with Engineered Code, based here in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. I'm a Microsoft MVP with more than 15 years of experience with Power Pages. My career began with ADX Studio, which was the company that originally built what's now known as Power Pages, then that Microsoft acquired 11 years ago now. It was in 2015. So if we're not already connected on LinkedIn, feel free to reach out and connect. Otherwise, you can follow us on Twitter or X. We've got our blog that we do as well. We've got our YouTube channel where we put out not only these recordings, but the recordings or the weekly tips that we do, all related to Power Pages. And I've also got the podcast that I co-host with George Dubinsky, again focused on Power Pages. That one's called Refresh the Cache. We got an episode coming out quite soon here, and I'm actually recording a couple more this evening. So keep an eye out on that. But yeah, if you follow us on either LinkedIn or on X, you'll get to see all the content we're producing about Power Pages. So look forward to connecting with anyone who not already connected with on LinkedIn. As always, just want to say thank you to Jason and the team at MS Dynamics World for their support over the years of these calls. Great collaboration, a great partnership. Really appreciate all they do for hosting and getting the word out so that we can get these things on the calendar every month and share this knowledge with the community. So thanks to Jason and team. Yeah, so our agenda is as usual. We've got our news. Then we'll dive into our today's topic, which is, as I mentioned, the server logic. And then we'll talk about the date and time of our next call in April. And then we will leave time for Q&A. As Jason mentioned, if you have any questions, just throw them in that questions area, and I'll do my best to pay attention to those and get you some answers. All right, moving on. So what do we have for news? Like I said, a pretty busy time for Power Pages. In fact, I think I prepped this presentation yesterday, and even this morning I checked the product blog, and there was even a new thing. So I think 4 announcements in the last month. So lots going on. I know we're, I think, getting closer to probably a release wave that would be coming up. So um, I think there's lots going to be happening in the Power Pages space. So this morning, the announcement I saw was about an agent API. So I saw basically a way that you can programmatically interact with agents, so you can kind of build your own UI for agents. Looks like it was part of the client API that is kind of new and fresh for Power Pages. So if you're interested in building agents but want a little bit more control over the UI for that, I think we've now got that agent API that's available. Again, that's hot off the press. That was this morning. Um, a couple days ago, I think what was announced was the ability to build Power Pages sites using a plugin for GitHub Copilot, CLI, and Claude Code. So basically ways to describe what you want and have those tools produce the the code to build those sites, and those kind of agents have been specifically tuned to understand Power Pages, table permissions, the security model, all that sort of stuff. So if you're into that that AI stuff for building sites, another thing that you can play with. They also announced that you can now enable the WAF the web application firewall independently from the content delivery network. Historically, those were kind of tied together. So you could enable the CDN, but if you wanted the WAF, you had to enable the CDN. To enable the WAF was not possible until you enabled the CDN. Now you do have the option. If you don't want the CDN, you can enable the web application firewall without enabling CDN. And there are also some enhancements to the kind of the integration with Copilot agents within Power Pages. So support for all authentication types. You can now test some of the stuff within Copilot Studio. So an agent created in Power Pages, I think you can test that now within Copilot Studio, and the ability to embed existing agents into Power Pages in kind of an easy way. So just some kind of UI, UX improvements there, and making it easier for makers to get Copilot agents within Power Pages. So it hasn't been that long since we last chatted. It's been kind of just a few weeks here. So as you can see, the velocity at which new changes are coming for Power Pages is pretty strong right now. So yeah, go check out the Power Platform or the Power Pages product team blog for all the kind of the details. And yeah, lots of cool things going on. Okay, now let's get into today's topic. So I kind of mentioned this at the beginning about how this is one of the biggest kind of improvements. Maybe not since the web API was made available. Has there been something from a pro dev standpoint, or like such a significant architecture? It's one of those things that we've been asking for forever since Microsoft bought the product. When ADX Studio owned the product, and server-side code was always possible. When once Microsoft took over, offered it as a SaaS offering. It's not like server-side code was impossible. It was just required quite a bit of overhead, quite a bit of more complex architecture. So now we've got some options. So what are we talking about when we talk about server logic? So as I mentioned, the long sought after server-side code for Power Pages. Server logic is JavaScript that runs directly on the Power Pages web server. So this code can't be seen or edited by the user, which was always the challenge with client-side JavaScript, is the security side of it. When you are writing client-side JavaScript, the user can see all of the code. Yeah, you can do things to obfuscate it a little bit. You can, minify it, but in the end, like that code is all there, and someone can kind of see what's going on. The other thing is that not only can people see it, but they can turn it off. Like there's, it's a click of a button to turn off JavaScript in your browser. Good luck browsing the modern web without JavaScript turned on. But if you're relying on JavaScript to do business critical things, users can turn it off, and not only can they turn it off, they can modify it. With the right dev tools, you can go in there and start just kind of changing what things do. So if you're relying on JavaScript to perform business critical validation, and that if someone were to turn that off, bad things would happen, that's always the risk with client-side JavaScript. So now, in terms of support for the different data models, you may see in my presentation here a few of these new indications. And so obviously all of server logic is new. I'm just highlighting some of the things that came out in the last few weeks. There was a recently there was a kind of a notice about some even newer features of server logic that weren't as part of the original kind of preview that was provided. So I'm just kind of highlighting those throughout the presentation. So up until just a few weeks ago, you had to have been on the standard data model. Now there's support for the, or sorry, you had to be on the enhanced data model. Now there's support for the standard data model. And in fact, when I show my screen here later on, I can show you it is actually a standard data model site. Now, just note that there are updates to the solution, like you need the latest version of the solutions in order to get that. So just make sure that if you want to play around with server logic, that you are going in and updating your solutions in the Power Platform Admin Center, or updating the portal or the website packages, or however it's kind of called there. But you need to make sure you got the latest and greatest version of the Dataverse solutions, because that contains the tables and the other stuff necessary for that. So if you go into your Power Pages site and you don't see the server logic area, there's a good chance that you're just on old versions of solutions. So take a look there. But again, it is supported both for enhanced data model and the standard data model. So when does your, so let's assume you've written this beautiful code. When does your code actually run? So right now it runs whenever you call it via JavaScript, which is kind of a little funny because I just said, well, you can't really rely on JavaScript client-side code. For now, you do need to still call that JavaScript, or call that server-side code using JavaScript. There's essentially a special endpoint in the web API where you can call to execute your Power Pages server logic. Basically what you do is you, and we'll get into this in a second here, but you create a file. Within that file, you have different functions that map to the different kind of HTTP methods. So get, post, put, patch, delete, those types of things. And so you call that endpoint, whatever HTTP verb you happen to use, that will kind of determine which of your functions is called. I think there were mentioned in the original announcement, there was mentions about having it happen on, say, form submission events or button clicks. My hope is that what we'll see server logic implemented, say, into the, you could say, hey, run this code when a form is submitted, and that could be done as configuration so that you know that it's going to run. So it's not something that you have to manually do or kind of do with JavaScript yourself. I'm hoping to see this kind of more integrated into the product, so we can leverage that, say, validation in a place where we know we can kind of guarantee that it will happen as part of the form submission and not rely on JavaScript, client-side JavaScript, to actually call it. So right now, what you'll see is we're calling it from client-side JavaScript, but in the future, hopefully, we'll see that expanded a bit too. Quick check. Okay, no questions. So how do we create server logic? It's actually quite simple. In the setup workspace, under the integrations area, there's a server logic area, and you basically create a new server logic file, essentially, and then you have the ability to edit that code in VS Code for Web. So why don't we just take a look quickly at how that looks? So you can see here I'm already in server logic. I'm just going to refresh the page, get everything going here. Loading up here. Yes, I'm in a live public site. So under the setup tab, you'll see, yeah, sometimes it kind of disappears from the menu, but there should be, you should see server logic in the menu under integrations. I haven't kind of nailed down what this actual kind of bug is, but yes, normally you'd see server logic. Thankfully, I already have this thing open. But here you can see server logic. You can see it's in preview. I can close this. So I already have one. I've created a bunch of our Power Pages tips for this, so I kind of created one there. But I can create a new one. I can call this for PCC. Now this name is important because that's the name of basically the endpoint that you're going to end up calling from your JavaScript, client-side JavaScript. The rest of this, not as important in terms of display name. I'll put one in just for completeness, description. And then you do need to set a role. So the roles are the web roles that someone must have in order to execute this server logic. So for now, I'll just say authenticated users, and I'll click add. And now we've got this 4PCC server logic file. If I click that, then I'll get this edit code button. I'm going to open that up. I'm going to close some of these other tabs here. That's going to open up VS Code for web. I'm going to click allow. Go through this whole process. You are now editing a live public site. And now you see we have this 4PCC serverlogic.custom.js file. So you can see now that because I've installed these solutions, and again, this is a standard data model. So we can see that it does work in the standard data model. So we have this new folder in the VS Code for web. We've got this 4pcc.serverlogic.custom.js.js. So when you create that, you'll see they provide you a giant example, and you can see here the different functions for the different HTTP methods. So here we have a get, and so here's the code that would run if we were to call a get, make a get request to the particular endpoint, and we'll see exactly how that works here in a second. But that's essentially how you create your file, and then there's your function. You can write whatever, well, not whatever, but lots of different types of JavaScript that you can write in there. And that actually kind of brings us to our next point. So what kind of code can we write? So basically, it's like you're writing kind of vanilla JavaScript, but keep in mind, this is running on the server. So you don't have access to the DOM. You can't add elements, query the DOM, any of that sort of stuff. This is running on the server, so you don't have any access to the user's details of the user's browser. Now, in addition to conditional JavaScript logic, if statements and case statements and loops and kind of the standard JavaScript objects, there are some special objects that are specific to this Power Pages server logic. So there is an HTTP client object. This is probably the most important one if you're trying to call external services, and we'll talk about kind of some of the use cases here in a second. But there's an HTTP client, so that allows you to make requests to other services, other Microsoft services, other external services. So the HTTP client lets you perform HTTP requests to other services, so allows you to integrate with other things. So think of it as kind of like doing an AJAX request in your client-side JavaScript. Use the HTTP client to send requests to other services. There's a site settings and an environment variable object. So site settings give you access to site settings in Power Pages. Honestly, environment variables, I'm not sure which environment variables that's in reference to. I'm guessing like the Power Pages, the Power Platform environment variables. So if you're storing anything in that sort of thing, I think that maybe is what it's referencing. I think, but it would also support the environment variables via site settings as well. There's objects for the website, so you can access things like, what's the name of the website, what's the URL of the website, as well as information about the currently logged in user, because when you make this request back to the Power Pages server, it is an authenticated request. It will provide details about who that user is, so you can get details about, it's essentially the contact object. There's a Dataverse object, which allows you to query Dataverse. So you can you can create data, you can query data, you can delete data, you can edit data, all that sort of stuff. You can perform those types of operations in Dataverse. A couple of special things that you can do in Dataverse via server logic. So one of them is you can actually execute bound functions, which I don't think you can do in the web API. So if you have a bound function or a bound custom API within within Dataverse, you can actually call those through this method. So if you have a need for that, you can create your function and use that to call that. The other big one, and this was new in the last couple of weeks here, is the ability to bypass the cache for queries. So if you're doing a query to Dataverse and you want to get around the Power Pages cache, there's actually a parameter in the function call that where you can just turn off and say, ignore the cache, don't query the cache for this, go right to Dataverse. This is almost the other big thing we've been asking for all these years is the ability to clear the cache. Not quite the same, because if you were to make that query, yes, you're going to get the latest data, but it's not going to impact any data that's cached in your forms and lists. So not quite the same as clearing the cache, but if you know that some data has changed in the background, maybe by a Power Automate flow, and you really need to get the latest data, you can do that using this particular architecture. So you could, again, on client side, call the Power Pages server logic and do a query using the cache bypass. There's also an object for the logger, so we'll see that here in a second in terms of how we can debug Power Pages and see the logging of it. And there's also a context object, so that's going to give you things like headers and query string parameters and what's the body of the request. So kind of accessing information similar to like the HTTP context that you get in C#. So when you're writing your code, again, your vanilla non-DOM related JavaScript, and then you got these special objects for interacting with Dataverse, making external calls, and logging or getting information about the request. Okay, so let's just go back to here. Server logic, not there. So I'm just going to put in Power Pages server logic. So I just want to kind of quickly go through these server logic, specifically the Dataverse one, just so you can see. So you can see we have the ability to create a record where we pass in a string and we pass in a JSON object that represents the object. We have retrieve record, so you're passing in the name, ID, possibly some options, and then you can see here this is that skip cache Boolean. So if you say true to that, you're going to get that, and then similar here, you got name, options for retrieving records. You have that option to skip the cache. Update record, again, entity set name, ID, payload, delete record, entity name, ID, and then this is our ability to invoke a custom API. So you can do this. You can invoke a bound function. So that's a get on this particular bound function, and then or invoke a bound action. So the ability to skip the cache might be a reason that people start embracing this a lot. The ability to call the web services, again, environment variables, site settings, all these are kind of well documented in terms of the different objects that we have access to in the server logic. Okay, so let's go back to this. So debugging. If you don't write perfect code the first time, sometimes you might have to resort to debugging. There's a couple of kind of main features that are provided by Power Pages server logic. You can't go onto the server itself and kind of debug the code that is running on the server itself, but there are a couple options. So one is the logger that I mentioned. So the ability to add logging messages into your code, and then what you have to do is you have to use the DevTools extension for Edge, which allows you to see the log. So in the same way that you can see kind of some server-side logging already with the DevTools, that's been expanded to also support the Power Pages server logic. So you essentially insert the logger statements into your code, and then if you open up the site using Edge, and then you have installed I think it's like the Power Platform, or it might be even like the Power Pages extension for DevTools, you'll get an extra tab that displays the error message or the log messages. So you can see the log messages as they occur like on the real server. So that's one great option to see how it reacts when it's running on the server itself. If you're just looking to like debug the the logic of your code, there's actually an option to debug to run the code locally on your own machine using VS Code Desktop. Now, let me show you, and I have this comment here about mocking, and I'll show you that as well. So I'm going to go back to my Power Pages site here. So now I've got this open in VS Code Desktop. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to download the latest version of this. Get rid of my Copilot. So I should see my new version here of I wonder if this is going to get stuck again here. I was having problems downloading this. Let me just switch to one of my other ones, my Kite Fan Club. Okay, so I have Server Logic in here. So I've got this Server Logic file. Again, I've downloaded this site using VS Code or using the PAX CLI within VS Code Desktop. I actually can run the code right in here. So the way you do that is at the bottom of your file, you just put in which function you want to run, because you can run the delete, the patch, the post, the put. So I'm just going to run the get. And then if you scroll to the top, you'll see the debug and the run options. So I can actually put a breakpoint in here. And if I say debug, I'm actually able to just kind of step through this code and go through, and I can actually see the logic as it happens. Now, the thing that's happening here is there's no communication with Dataverse in here. And there's obviously like, server context. There's no query string parameters. I haven't defined any of that. And there's no communication with Dataverse. So if I was trying to get site settings, if I was trying to create records with Dataverse, none of that actually happens. The only kind of special object that does the thing that you want it to do is the, I guess the logger does work. You can see get called here in the logger. But the one thing that actually does work is the HTTP client. So if you're working with an external service, if you're using this to integrate with an external service, you can actually use this to run that, and it will make the calls from your local device here, and will make the calls to those external services. So this is a great option for testing out those HTTP client requests. Now, in terms of all these different objects, so this like query string parameters, or if you want to simulate requests to Dataverse, what's provided in here is the ability to mock data and kind of create mocks of those requests. So if I go in here and I look in my VS Code directory, you'll see there's this server logic debug runtime.cjs. And so this is where all those objects are defined, and this is what the local debugging will use. So for example, if you wanted to add a query string parameter, you can see here we've got test ID this. So if I go back to my server logic, that's why it didn't enter this thing, because I actually do have that query string parameter here. So if I say debug, if I look in here and I look at query string parameters, I've got this ID defined in my mock file. So if you just go through this file here, you'll actually see how this is where the logger function is defined. So it's just doing a console.warn. You can see here if you want to set up headers, if you want to set up, if you're trying to simulate a post and you want to, fake what the body's going to look like, you can do all of that in here. When we talked about how the HTTP client works, that's because in here it's actually defining and sending, sending those requests. So it's just being run through this JavaScript. So the HTTP client implementation is actually quite big. So I'm just going to minimize that. So with Dataverse, because this isn't actually sending a request to Dataverse, we don't want to necessarily handle authentication and all that sort of stuff, you can use this to simulate, retrieving a record. So you can see here, what we're doing is we're simulating that a retrieved record is called. We're returning nothing in the body, but you could simulate, you could put in the data in here, so that you could do it that way. So that's how you can simulate the Dataverse. You can kind of, you could use logging to basically go through this on the server and kind of get the results back, and then you could copy them into here so that you can replay them for local debugging. Is one way to kind of get your mock data created. Again, you can mock the user details. So what's their full name, what's their email, what are their roles, what's their contact ID. You can mock site settings. So depending on the different site settings you want to use, we're going to talk about the use cases here in a second, but if you're using this to like call an API and you need API endpoints as site settings, or you need the API keys, again, you can put those in this, in here. Same with the website details, and same with the environment variables. So again, this is created as a template. You can kind of edit this file to match your requirements and to kind of mock the data that you need to properly kind of step through your function. So again, when you're doing this local debugging, this is one of those new features that just came out in the last couple of weeks. When you're doing it, you can use the HTTP client, but all the rest is kind of mocked data, not actually no direct connection to Dataverse. Got a question here, maybe a comment. Yeah, so Jim mentions one of the use cases. So maybe I'll just kind of move on to the use cases, and I can also mention what Jim has mentioned here. So why I've talked about how this is kind of a big deal, but I haven't necessarily mentioned why. So Microsoft has some tutorials on their website, and kind of use cases or examples of how you can use this. So one of them is to talk to an external service. And so, Jim has mentioned, like, use it to talk to a currency, to make a request to a currency conversion service that has the up-to-date rates. And so you can do those conversions kind of there. If you were to do that, say, in client-side code, maybe you could do that, but maybe that currency conversion website has an API key that you don't necessarily want to share with the user. Remember that when you write JavaScript in the browser, anything you do there, the user can see. So if you have an API key, the user can see that. If you put the API key in the server logic code, the user can no longer see that code. And so you can store that API key in an environment variable or in a site setting, and then it's kind of hid away in the service or in the server logic. So calling external services. They've also got a tutorial for calling the Graph API in SharePoint, so you can use it to call other Microsoft services that you want. And then there's one about Azure Functions. So I'm going to not get too much into Azure Functions, because that's why we've got Alan with us here today. He's going to kind of go through that. And then another one, and probably kind of the big one that people are talking about, is the ability to integrate payment into Power Pages. There is a payment option within Power Pages that you can install. Sometimes people want to kind of do it themselves. They've got different payment providers they want to use. Typically, the steps for working with payment providers involve some sort of server-side code. It involves an API key. It involves some secure communication. Historically, those have been done with using Azure services like Azure Functions or Azure Web Apps. In this case, now with with Server Logic, you're able to do that without adding that extra architectural piece. So you're not adding the cost, you're not adding the complexity of another Azure service, you're not adding the complexity in terms of ALM, of keeping that code up to date, pushing it between environments. So that's why we're so excited about this Server Logic. It doesn't give us something we couldn't do before. It just makes things that we used to do before a lot easier. And I think what it'll do is, there's a lot of scenarios before where in the past that those more complex architecture, just like, it wasn't worth it. So you'd end up doing kind of hacks or workarounds or things that you would prefer not to do. This just makes it really easy to, like, hey, I can do a quick call to an external service. On a lot of projects, it wouldn't have been worth a companion app or an Azure function to do that. Now, because it's just so easy, so built in, there's no extra costs, there's no extra architecture pieces for it that are outside of Power Pages. It just makes those things really, really straightforward to do. So So yeah, so those are some of the use cases. I next want to welcome back Alan. Alan's presented at least once or twice, I think, on this call in the past. He's worked with the server logic for one of our clients now on a project, and so I just wanted to invite him, and I think he's going to show us how this works and how we can use server logic to securely talk to an Azure function. So, Alan, welcome. Thanks for taking some time today and to sharing this with the rest of us.
Thanks, Nick. Glad to be here. I'm going to begin by sharing my screen. There we go. I'm going to demonstrate basically a very simple Azure function. It's not going to do anything like connect to a payment provider and provide your secure links for payment or anything like that. It's basically just the simple, basic out-of-the-box Azure function that you get if you start a new Azure Function project in Visual Studio. I have over here, I have deployed it to Azure. And if I were to run my Azure function from here just to show what happens, all that happens is it returns a response that says, welcome to Azure Functions. So what I want is a way to have that called from my Power Pages site without exposing the URL or like the function URL or the key, the API key code that is used in this case just for basic security. So I don't want to expose those to the browser at all. So I'm going to use server logic. So in my site, Nick already showed this. Sorry, I'll go here. Loading, see, server logic is showing in my menu. I'm not sure what Nick was doing wrong, but I've got a server logic here called Azure Function Test. It's going to do something extremely simple. I'll open Visual Studio Code. Okay, here we are. In this server logic, I have cleared out all of the other functions. There is no post, patch, delete. There are no other functions in here besides get. So you can't call anything besides get. So what I'm going to do is I have one simple logging message. I'll show that when it comes up. I'm retrieving the URL for my Azure function from a site setting as well as the key. And then I'm combining them into a URL. So the URL query string code equals that key. Then I'm using the HTTP client and I am posting to that URL, getting the response, parsing the response. So this comes back as a string. So this comes back as an unparsed, just a JSON string that you have to parse yourself to do anything with. So after I've parsed that, it will tell me if there was a server error or not. If there is a server error, I want to dump out of here and give what the message is. Otherwise, I'm going to return the response body, which, as we saw, is, let me just run that again, is welcome to Azure Functions. So this is about as simple as it can get for the server logic function itself. But now let's talk about how we actually get at that thing. So on the home page of my site, I've just created a simple button and then attached some JavaScript to it. And I'm only going to have this if the user exists. And the reason for that is because you can see I've set this so that just like in Nick's example when he was showing, I set this so authenticated users can show it. So it's not on the anonymous site. So the JavaScript for it is fairly simple. I just get my button, attach a click handler, and I call this shell.ajax safe post. Now, this is something that Power Pages sets up for you. It basically takes care of the token retrieval and the authentication for you, so you don't really have to worry about how to get the token and then authenticate to the service. This will sort of do that for you. I call to the URL underscore API / server logics. So that'll be like my site's base URL, and then underscore API / server logic / the name, which as Nick had alluded to, that is this specific name here. And then I get my response, and all I'm going to do is just pop up an alert with the response. So let's see it in action. That's it. Welcome to Azure Functions. So we've called the Azure function on the server behind the scenes, but we have not exposed anything about the Azure function to the server. You can see the URL that it called was not the Azure function. It was my Power Apps Portals URL underscore API, right? Just like I was demonstrating from the code. So the other thing that I'll show about that, Nick had alluded to this, is, so I've just moved over to the Edge browser, and I've got the DevTools with the extension installed. So if I call that Azure function from here, I get the same thing, same response, but I also get some log messages that come through, including this one. So these ones are sort of automatic. The system just logs them, but I created this one. So if we come back to my bit of code, my first line here, server.logger.log, calling Azure function. So I've put this in. I can put this in basically every step along the way to sort of insert trace statements if I'm having trouble debugging this, and it's not something like, if it's something that's not so easily debugged locally. And I'll provide an example in just a moment of something that would not be easy to debug locally. So that's the simple Azure function integration. Are there any questions or comments about that before I move on?
I don't see any questions, but Alan, I'm not sure if you know this, but do you know how that server, like that, those trace logs end up, like how they're retrieved? Have you ever
I don't know exactly where these are stored, but like this thing will be calling like a service that can retrieve them, so it knows.
Well, take a look at your network tab and actually look at when the page reloads. I think they are just included in the like if you refresh the page, I think it includes it in the HTML of the page.
Oh.
So just try looking for any of the text that you might have found in there. I think that's what I discovered.
Okay, there's that, and then
so I think if you go to your logs, is there anything in there? Because did it run yet?
In these logs?
Yeah.
It has not run.
Oh, yeah.
Now it's run. But it wouldn't be in the
I think I discovered at one point that it's there's like some markup in here that it actually pulls from.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry, that was just an aside. It just kind of reminded me of where that stuff comes from.
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure. I figured that it was probably calling some sort of API to get these that only it is capable of retrieving, but
because does it update if you click the call Azure function? Does it update right away? Like, does it actually have more?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, as it goes,
cool.
it just keeps.
So yeah, it must be calling something there. Okay, cool. Yeah, because I think you can also put in these comments, is it Liquid you can put those
Actually, I
logs
wonder.
into?
Can you?
I think there's other ways to put those logs, and then there's also like it'll give you logs related to like authentication. If like authentication is failing, you can
Okay.
put in this and get additional logs in there. So
Yeah, I know that there are things that you can call.
yeah. Anyway, sorry, didn't mean to take
No,
you off track.
that's great. Okay, so there are no questions about this. Nick, I'm not sure if you were planning to talk about this, but I have a bit about calling the Dataverse functions as well.
I got nothing left. So yeah, if I haven't covered it, yeah, feel free to go ahead.
Okay, so so there's a second server logic I set up for support requests, and basically, so the idea that I wanted to demonstrate here is the ability to create sort of your own set of interactions with the data in your system that don't go through entity lists or sort of like lists and basic forms and advanced forms, that you can create sort of a wholly bespoke version of this, and without having to configure the web API and the security of the web API in the portal, and you don't have to expose like any of your table names or column names or anything like that to the front end. So basically, this server logic calls the get to support requests. And if I come back here, I'll show you what that looks like. So the get is basically just sort of wrapping what we would have otherwise done via the web API, just retrieving multiple records. So it's this new table I created called support requests, where the contact is equal to server.user.contact.id. So that was, Nick had alluded to that as well. You can access information about the current user, including this contact ID. So I'm using that to get just a list of support requests, parsing the response, returning it. And before I return the data, I'm mapping that list of support requests to a custom object. So instead of like my publisher prefix here is RAR underscore, and I'm basically just stripping that off of these things. And for the category, I'm using the formatted value, the label, instead of the number, and I'm using the formatted date. So I'm just going to return that as a string. So if I come back to here and we look at the response, we can see, so this is the response as it comes back. This is what a response from server logic looks like. So it'll have a request ID, a success that is true or false, server logic name, which tells you what you called, and then data. And this is your string that is just whatever the result was. So when I parse that string, I get this data, which, oh, I'm getting an error here now. I'm not sure why that is. Common data service. Okay, it's complaining for some reason about this. This was working right before, but either way, I'll move on to. So you can see I've created sort of a new way. So instead of like the pop-up that normally comes from like when you're on a list and you're adding something via form, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to choose this and say this is a description. And before I move on, I'm going to show you that this is just, actually, it'd be better to show from here. This is all just an HTML structure that I created myself from like just using the Bootstrap stuff. I just laid out a form however I wanted, and then I'm going to fill it out, and I click the submit button. That is going to submit here. So this succeeded, and then it was going to refresh that, and I'm not sure why. Not sure why this GET request is failing now when it didn't used to be, but we can come back here into the CRM and we can see that here's the support request that I created without exposing anything at all about Dataverse in the back end. I basically, and I didn't have to configure anything in the web API to do this either. The only thing I did have to configure were permissions, because it does respect table permissions. So in this case, just to get this moving faster, I just opened it wide up, but it will respect permissions, so you could have much more sane permissions than what I've demonstrated here. And here's what that post looks like. So I take in the response and then I convert that. So sort of the opposite of what I did up here. I'm converting that into a payload that the Dataverse Web API will accept. And here's actually a good case for where the local debugging might not work. So I was having trouble when I was first writing this. I had set up this property like this, and it was causing this record creation to fail every time, and it was not giving me an explanation of why that was, and I was having trouble over and over again. That's not something that debugging locally would ever give you, because it doesn't actually, like, it's not capable of determining that this would be an invalid payload. But eventually I was able to figure out that it needed to be a capital C, and now this part works. So yeah, that's I guess that's basically the overall demo. I guess the last thing I should show just quickly is for the site settings. So talking about them when Nick was talking about mocking. So for the site settings, in order to debug locally for that Azure function, I just added some lines of code here. So if the name of the site setting passed in is demo/URL, then return this value. And if it's demo/key, then return this value. And that way, it actually does make this call when I debug this thing locally. So I'll just do that again here. Debug, and if we go down here, so we can see the URL and the key have been passed in, which means when I step over everything, response.body is welcome to Azure Functions. That's it. Sorry.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Alan. Yeah, I think you did a great job of showing, like, this server logic is really about hiding things for the most part. It's doing things that you don't want the user to be able to control. You brought up a great point about the web API. I love the web API, but it certainly can be a big hole that you have to open in terms of security. So by using this, if there's just kind of one little operation that you need to do, rather than exposing it, or say there's like one query you want them to be able to do on a table, rather than open up the whole web API, you can create your own server. You can create just a function that does the very specific query that you want users to be able to do, and you don't have to open up the whole web API. All right, so let me just steal the screen back here for a second, and we will wrap up. Okay. Still sharing.
I think I've made you the presenter.
Okay. It just gave me an error. That was interesting. I've never seen it. It's like, we cannot share your screen. Let's try that one more time. There we go. Now I see it. All right. So just quickly, our next call will be April 9th. So next month, in a few weeks here, same time, April 9th. If you've got a topic that you'd like to see covered, please let me know. I think people were asking for Server Logic last month, so that's what we decided to cover this month. Again, thank you to Jason and team at MS Dynamics World. Thank you to Alan for joining us today to give kind of some of his hands-on real-world experience with this technology. It is still in preview. You know, I know people are clamoring to be able to use this in production, so hopefully we'll see that made available soon, so that we can use that in production on real projects. I see that Stephen's asking for Copilot agents, so maybe we can. We'd probably have to bring in a guest on that one. Not my area of expertise, but I think I got some people I might be able to ask to help out with that. So thank you, Stephen, for that idea. Otherwise, you know, if there's any other questions that people want to throw in the chat, happy to answer those. But again, thanks for attending, and hope to see you all in April.
All right, well, then things there. Great job, Nick. Thank you again to Alan as well. And we'll be in touch soon. Bye, everyone.
Thanks all.